Yeah, Hyphen we would be building Promise.all function from scratch. And so let's see what is Promise.all function. So Promise.all is a static method that takes an iterable of a promise as the input and returns a single promise. This returned promise fulfills when all the input of the promise is fulfilled, including when an empty iterable is passed with an array of fulfillment values. It rejects when any of the input promise rejects with the first rejection reason. So basically, Promise.all takes a list of promises and it returns the output when all the promises are resolved. Like it returns the results or a list of responses from those promises, and then we can traverse that array to get the corresponding response of the corresponding promise. But it waits to get all the promises resolved and then only returns the output. But let's suppose any promise gets rejected in that list of promise, then basically it simply returns whenever it gets the first rejected promise, it simply returns the rejected output or rejected response. So in this way, promise works. If we have to see example, and we can see example of this thing here, we can see we have three promise. One is we're simply returning 3. And in second, we are simply returning 42. And it's a constant. And in third, we have created a set timeout. And here, after 100 milliseconds, we are returning foo. Right. So when we will return promise all, then it will first we have in the promise all we are passing the list of all 3 promises. Then basically it will wait for all 3 promises to get resolved. So in our case, first and second are instantly resolving, but this third one is taking 100 milliseconds to resolve. So once 100 milliseconds are passed, we will get all the values as the output in this value array. So our first index would be the response of this promise 1, which is 3, and the third would be the 42. Second would be the 42, and the third would be foo. So in this way, we can see when we run this, we can see we are getting all the 3 responses as 3 responses in my output array. I tried running this too, and I got the same answer. If I have to talk about the syntax of Promise.all, then I can say it simply accepts a list of iterable when this iterable is basically an array of promises. And what is the return value? It returns a promise that is already fulfilled if the iterable passed is empty, and it's an asynchronous function, so it is asynchronously fulfilled and it is asynchronously rejected. So that is pretty much the Promise.all function. We would be writing unit test to test the Promise.all functionality. So we can start by creating a Promise.all test file. In that I am using just to create my unit test. So I can simply write a describe and say I would be testing Promise.all. Be testing Promise.all function and say Promise.all unit test. And in this, I would be creating my first internal arrow function. My first test would be a happy path, so I can simply say to be able to resolve all promise. So I can say resolve all promise, and inside this, I would be creating my couple of my promise which I want to resolve and test. So I can start by creating promise. I can say constant promise 1 equals to new promise, or I can simply use the promise class to create a promise for me. So I can say promise, and I would simply want to resolve it with some return value. So I can simply pass numbers to it. I can say promise resolve 1. This will give me, well, let's take a string. I can say this is my value 1, 2, and 3. This way I can create 3 promises and all 3 of them will resolve. Okay, my bad. I can just create 3 promises out of that. Just change numbers to my respective numbers. So I have 3 promise now, and I just want to resolve all these 3 promises by my Promise.all function. So I can simply say I'm creating this as a sync method so that I can resolve all 3 promises at once. So for that I can do is I can say let's create a results in array, and I can say await promise.resolve or promise.all. Be using my actual method. Like this was my act part. Now this is my arrange part of unit test. Yeah, so I can pass all my list of promises to my Promise.all. Yes, so we have 3 promises, and now we can be using a sync await, and we will get the result of all promises in this results array. And now in the expect, we can simply check whether we are getting the desired results or result or not. I can say expect results to be what, like I'm thinking I would be getting 1 by 1 each value. So I can say results to equal to value value 1, 2, and 3. So I can simply say the array of 3, value 1, value 2, and value 3. If I run this test, it should pass. I can say npm run test, and I can pass the relative path of this test file. It failed. Or I can do npx test. I got the issue. The file should be named as promise.all.test. Then only the testing framework will pick it up as a test. Let's try running the file again. Okay, the file has been renamed, so I can just take the relative path again. I can say npm run test, and this time I can pass the new file name. Just npm all run test, and yeah, this test passed. This is a complete positive test. Then now let's have one more unhappy path of test. I can say it as of now I'm using promise.all, right? So and let's have one more negative test for promise.all, and here I can make one of them as rejected. And if any, as per promise.all definition, if any of the promise is rejected, then basically the whole promise.all then the whole output becomes rejected. So promise.all will return a rejected response. So it will not, rejected would be basically throwing an error also. So I would be needing a try catch block to basically handle the rejected response. So I can surround this with try. I can move this thing there and this also. And basically in the catch I can expect, like, whenever, because of this promise2, this promise.all will get rejected, and once it get rejected, it will go into the catch block, and in the catch block I can simply write the error, and in the error would be the value that has been passed it to reject, and hence I can simply expect the rejected value that I got. So I can say error would be my value 2 because that got rejected. So I can just have a single value now, which is value 2, and it should be my value when the promise gets rejected, as that is the value I'm passing to that rejected promise. Instead of value 2, why not let's name it as error only. Like, so I can name this as error, and if it is error, then here also I have to expect an error, same value that has been passed to a rejected promise. So I can do it like this, and then I can simply run my test, and let's see whether all of them are passing now or not. Yeah, so both of these tests passed. Till now it looks fine to me. Now also test a happy path with the help of some asynchronous timeout. So I can have one more thing. I can first I can rename this test to reject all promise. I can rename it to reject and say rejects all if one promise gets rejected. Okay, so one more type of promise that I can create is I can do it with the help of set timeout way. So one, though I can keep value. So first one, I can rename this as promise.all is all delayed promise. So delayed, by delayed I mean I would be adding set timeout and dealing the promises by some time, and then expecting to get them be resolved in the order in which they are coming to the callback queue. So I can say new promise, and here it takes two parameters that resolve when rejected. So I can just have the two parameters resolve when rejected, and then inside this I can say just have a set timeout, basically resolve my set timeout with the value that is being passed to. I can first say just resolve this promise, and then after how much delay I can say, now I can say 1000 milliseconds, and the value would be, I can say value 1. And same in the case I can say for promise 2, I can set value 2, and this time I can give 100 milliseconds, and I name this to value 2, and this would be my value 1, and the third one I'm planning to keep it as is, right? So what should be my expected output now? My expected output should be value 3 first, because it's not a async. It will, like, the timer is here, right? So it will directly come to my callback queue, and call stack will first print the value 3, and then after that this 100 milliseconds should come in my callback queue. So it should be value 2, and the last one is the value 1, which will come after 1000 milliseconds in my callback queue. So I think this should be my order: value 3, then value 2, and then value 1. Let's see what I'm assuming is correct or not. Let's run all the test again once again. Let's see. Something failed, and now let's see why it failed. So it is saying it was expecting value 3 first, which is, if I change this to value 3, then what will happen? Let's see. I'm directly returning a constant value, so now there is no promise. So by the help of call stack only this will come. Let's see how it will do now. Okay. So the result in the promise, why I'm failing? Because in the promise, the result would still be in the same order, just that one will come later and a little bit. So the promise all will only yield you the output when all the list of promises passed to it has got the answer, and each index is basically denoting the corresponding answer of the promise one. So promise one, this value one, the first index is representing the value returned from the promise one, and same is the case of promise two, and same is the case of promise three. So they will have their only corresponding values, irrespective of which time they came, who came first and who came second, but the output would be in the same sequence as the sequence is there in the input. So if the inputs are 1, 2, 3, then the output would also be value 1, 2, and 3. This is how the promise all works. So I can just run this and let's see what we get. Okay, still something is weird. Why expected -2? I can console log the results and see what I am getting. Okay, the file was not saved, that's why it was not failing. Now once the file is saved, I'm getting the same output in the same order. So irrespective of internally, value 3 is suppose giving you the first output, and then the value 2 and the value 1, but promise all will only return once all the outputs, all the responses are returned by each promise. And then how will it sort the values? It will sort in the same order that we have supplied the promises. So like if the promise 1 was first, then the first index in the response I will be noting the response of the first promise. And similarly, the second promise response index, second index would be returned in the response of the second promise, and so on. So in this way, we will get the results. So that is pretty much on the, I think. Okay, so we can have one more test and we can see the actual APIs in action. And there we can see how the promise looks. So I can create a few mock APIs. Yeah, so in the last test, I'm thinking to basically test actual API calls. So I can just basically mock API calls. So I can say now test, let's just create a copy of this, and I can say should resolve all API calls. So for resolving API calls, I'm thinking to first create a make request method, which will basically be making a request to a API. It's just okay. So it's why this I'm just saying I've created a make request method. Internally, I would be using fetch to make a API call and have 1,000-second delay or so. Or if I want, I can also remove timer. Just that I have to make. Inside this, I'm saying make request will get a URL, and then inside this, I'm creating this new promise. And by that I'm fetching the URL. And once I got the response, if the response is valid, then just return response or data to my resolve of this promise. Else, if the API fails, then simply reject it, and we'll go to catch, and here in the eject type represent the error that I got from the API. So this is pretty much this make request method does, and then I can just write my actual test. I just want to make 3 API calls. So I have already taken reference of 3 mock API calls. So these are my 3 mock API calls. And if you hit open this, then all these APIs will be returning you a valid JSON response. So I'm just making a call using map and making these 3 API calls, basically creating 3 separate promises using this make request method. So I will get those 3 promises. If I have to console log those promises, I can also console log just to see how my promises are looking. And then here I'm just now using promises all, and I'm saying just resolve whenever all the promises resolve, just get the data, and the length of my data should be 3 because I'm making a 3 API call site, so my length should be 3. So that is the thing I'm expecting. And once that is there, I'm just doing done, basically closing the test also. So let's see if it passes or not, whether I get 3 responses from the API or not. I'm just checking the length here. So let's see. You can say the same thing, and let's see whether my test will pass. Yeah, voila, my test passed. I got 3. Okay, the file is itself not saved. That's why 3 test. Okay, so yeah, the 4 of my test passed. Now just have one more unhappy test for this. So resolve all API calls. Yeah, I can have one more unhappy test. Should not resolve all API calls if any of them fails. So to simply fail the API call, to just fail it, if any of them fails, so just to fail this thing, what I can do is I can just make one of my link as invalid. I can just add some VI tested, like I can say TTT or something. I can just make this thing make one link wrong, and then ideally this link should fail and this should throw error, and then my promise should not be of length 3 anymore. Since if any of the promises gets rejected, so any of the API calls get rejected, then the whole promise all is got rejected. So basically I would be getting the output in catch. So I can say in the catch so this data length would be 0. Basically, it will not be called itself. In the catch, I would be getting a data. So in the catch, if I want to say, I can move this to my catch and I can say should not be null. And let's also console log the yeah. So basically, my is not null, and this means all my tests got passed. We will actually code our own promise all function. So yeah, let's just name our own promise all function as function my promise all, right? And now what I can say is, so I can closely observe any test and I can see my promise all function basically accepts a list of promises. So I can also make this accept as list of promises, right? Promises, right? Now inside this I can create, and it accepts a list of promises, and what it returns, it basically returns the result as you see here. So I can also create a results array where I would be storing all my results. And one more thing, our size of result array would be equal to the size of the promises passed. So basically I need something to save the size. So I can say let result, I can maintain a counter, I can name it as result counter, and I can initially initialize this to 0. Now since it would be dealing with promises, so they will take some time to resolve. Also we are doing with playing with timeouts, also promise might take time. So basically we need to use internally promise class to build our promise all. So we can just have a internally have okay, so before that let's see, we can just loop over all our promises that we have, and we will one by one deal with each promise. So I can create a for each, I don't need this array, and basically each element, the first index is in my element is the actual value, so I can name it as promise. Like one by one it will give me each promises from the promises array. The second index is the index, second parameter is the index of that particular promise. So this I got. Now inside this what I can say is, okay, so one thing I can do is, since my promise all would be returning of type promise, right? That's why it's of type promise, right? That's why I'm able to apply await, or I'm able to use that then syntax on promise sites. This is because it's itself is a promise. One more thing we can observe here is, like, this promise all function is there, right? It is giving me result, that is fine, but result will come when we will basically try to resolve the promise output. So this promise all function itself returns a promise, and that's why we use await keyword. And once we use await keyword, it tries to resolve the promise that has been returned, the complete promise returned by this promise all, and then we get the result there. So basically this whole promise all function would be returning a promise to us, and then we will be resolving it. So this function, in a way we can say, my promise all will return a promise to us. So I can simply say return new promise to me, and inside this new promise I can just create this function. We can create this function, and I can just move all my logic inside that thing. I can just cut this, and I can say this my promise all function is returning me a promise, right? I can just close the brackets of this, and inside this it is getting, I'm just using this, I'm just setting this logic to have results and result counter. And one more thing, this promise callback functions get two things as a parameter. One is the resolve function, and other is the reject function. So we will be using that internally. Now we have results, we have result counter, and we will loop into all the promises that we got. So we would be one by one getting the promise, and then we will be trying to resolve that promise, right? So I can say this is my promise, what I'm getting, right? So I can simply try to resolve this promise. I can use one more resolve to basically, in this I can pass my promise, and internally I can expect to resolve this promise. So I can say then once this promise is resolved, then this is because why I'm using this promise resolve, right? Because suppose the value that I'm passing is not a promise, right? Suppose you can see the example of this case, right? Like suppose you can see this value 3, right? This is itself not a promise. So if instead of value 3, like if instead of this promise resolve here, I have done it like this, right? I have simply done promise dot then, right? Then basically this promise would be a value, a simplest thing, on the string we don't have any then method, so the code would have breaked here because string does not have a promise, right? So I am here basically explicitly typecasting anything back to promise. So if it is a promise, then it's well and good. If it is not a promise, then this promise.resolve static function will convert it to a promise, and then I'm resolving the promise. So once I resolve the promise, I will get the actual value out of that, and then I can use this value to do my logic. I can say whatever value you got, just store it in the results I, and at which place, at the particular index which I'm dealing with. So suppose I'm dealing with the first promise, then the index would be 0. So at index 0 only you can store the promise, and similarly for other promises you can store the promise result or value at their corresponding indexes. So I have this, you can say at this index store my value, and after storing a single value I can simply increment my counter. So I can say that I got my first promise. Like the promise can resolve at different time, right? Like if the API, if it is an API or if it is a set time or different time intervals, then it will resolve at different time, right? So I can just keep on incrementing it. But one thing I'm saying, like once all my promises are resolved, right, then I don't have to do anything. So I can simply say if the resolve counter is equals to the length of my promises, then I can simply resolve my complete. I'm just resolving this my outer promise. Whoever is basically resolving this promise, it will return the results output to it. So I can simply pass the results whenever all my promises are resolved, then simply return the result. This thing I'm doing with this, right? And I can just format a document. And now this is the happy part. Now so let's suppose this promise fails, like in this case, right? Like we had a promise reject. Then it will not go to the end, then it will go to catch. So to handle that, I can simply create catch here also, right? This is closing here, right? So I can say dot catch, and in case of failed API call also, it will fail, right? Then in both the cases, it is going to catch. So I can here have a catch block, and inside the catch block, I can have my value. So catch will basically get an error, like whenever something is promise is failing, right? Then why not just rename it as error only? And I can say just whenever you're getting an error, then use the outer reject method of my outer promise, so that I can reject my whole promise return type. So I can say simply pass reject and pass whatever error you are getting, do the reject callback. So yeah, I think this should be enough on my Promise.all function. Let's just once revise it. Like you can say there's an outer, so my Promise.all function is getting a list of promises, which is fine, and overall it is returning a promise, right, which will resolve the results when my resolved counters are equal to this, and it is having a reject, and it will reject when some promises, any of the promises to error, and it will simply reject it. Suppose irrespective of how many promises I resolve, whenever I get a first reject, it will simply reject the whole promise. So that is the thing that it is doing here. Like in this our test case, right, where we got this rejected, so once I got a rejected, it will simply reject all the 3 promises and simply return the rejected promise. In this way, I have results, I have resolve counter, and then I am just looping on all the promises, converting each promise explicitly converting each promise to promise, and then waiting for its value. Once the value is there, I'm storing that value to a particular index and incrementing the counter, and if the counter becomes equals to length, then simply resolve all the results. So yeah, this is pretty much my Promise.all. Let's see whether it works with my test or not. So for that, what I can do is I can simply replace wherever I'm using Promise.all in my code with my Promise.all method and see whether my tests are passing or not. It's used at 6th place. Let's see. So I replaced everywhere my Promise.all method, and now let's see whether my test will pass with this or not. And voila, everything is passing. So cool. So basically we are able to implement our Promise.all function. Cool. Yeah, then thank you.